Well, we find ourselves at the point of touching on Hoi. This is the name to a whole bunch of tricks that I've come up with over the years. A kind of umbrella term for many different variations of a single method or a core method that can be taken in lots of different directions. Now, this trick, probably more than any of the others on this DVD set, really lives and dies on small details. And it is these details that you need to perform this trick in the real world. I first published this trick when I was 16 years old, and in the time since I've added lots of details, lots of additions and lots of new thoughts to the core mechanism that underpins the method. And also consistently from that time I've met magicians from all over the world that have read the trick, liked the idea, tried it in their performances, and to be frank, I've had mixed success. I've met probably 50% that enjoy performing it and have great success with the trick, and 50% that have tried it once or twice and decided it simply couldn't work. Ordinarily, in a very short conversation with those magicians that have had problems with the routine, I can ascertain what the issue is. Now, this to me is simply because I've created a certain fluency with the method itself over a long period of time. I understand quite strongly that the details of each element are going to create the outcome that we need. And if you miss even one of the details, there's a high chance the trick won't work. So I'm going to give you all of the information, a whole bunch of things that I've never shared anywhere else, all of the new thoughts and all of the things that I believe will take this trick and make it a surefire part of your repertoire. We're going to begin with the basic version. This is the thing that you need to understand inside and out, as well as the back of your own hand, in order to start using it to go into other directions. So, we have 3 spectators that will join us on the stage. This routine is all about detail. So as you might guess, even before they arrive on the stage, there are details that we need to pay close attention to. The positioning of the chairs. This will sound crazy, but I promise you, by using this, it will help. Best we understand them clearly. 3 chairs. These 2 chairs are closer together than this chair is to this. This, a very small point, these 2 are closer to each other than these 2. Once you have that layout, that's really all you need. The reason for this is, in a moment, you're going to ask 3 people to come up onto the stage and sit on the chairs. You want to be picking spectators that do not have heavy clothing. If you see a guy that's wearing a sheepskin jacket with a 3-piece suit and a scarf, he's not your guy for this. You want to make sure you're using spectators with single layers, maybe a shirt, maybe a t-shirt, a jacket and a shirt is fine, but nothing too bulky. That's the first point of the spectator selection. You will have them sit in all 3 chairs. You will now continue by giving them the following instructions. You will ask them to sit with their feet flat on the floor, their hands in their laps. You'll then ask them to take a deep breath of air in and to release that. At that moment, you'll instruct them to relax back in their chairs. Now we have a situation with 3 people on stage, feet flat on the floor, hands flat in the lap, and they're all resting with their backs against the chair. You will say, in a moment, you will hear a sound. The sound that you will hear will be this. When you hear that sound, you will close your eyes and keep them closed until I ask you to open your eyes again. I understand that with somebody walking around behind you like this, you might be fearful. I promise you I won't do anything to upset or embarrass you. You're in safe hands. This is really vital. You have to assure the spectators that you're not going to do something silly with them, because you're asking them to sit facing an entire audience with their eyes closed. They need to be relaxed. The main reason they need to be relaxed is you're going to be giving strong verbal instructions, and you need to be sure that that communication is happening in 2 ways. You need to be certain that the spectator is not distracted by feeling self-conscious or nervous based on the position you're asking them to be in, sat there with their eyes closed. So give them that assurance. You'll now move to behind these 2 spectators. Remember, these 2 chairs, or this chair and this chair, are closer together than this chair and this chair. We will now stand in the following way. You will take your left foot and plant it directly between the 2 chairs. Now, it's going to be kind of strange positioning that you're going to place yourself in, but all of this will happen within a very short space of time, so it won't look strange in performance, but as we explain it, and indeed as you practice it, I recommend doing it a single step at a time. Once you understand this, you won't have any fear about what you're going to do. So, you place your left foot in the space between the 2 chairs and you lean over the spectators. Now I'm naturally very short, that's what I was given. If you're very tall, this is even easier. For a short person, it's more difficult because generally speaking, the people are here with me. I really am a miniature human being. So they're normally about here, but if you're tall, this whole thing becomes much easier. I'm very jealous of you. So you put your foot in between the space and you lean into the spectators, not touching them in any way. Throughout all of this, be ultra aware of any long flowing Merlin sleeves that you might have, or any kind of robes, or anything that might swing and hit somebody. Because throughout the entire thing, you're going to be talking about if you just felt me touch you. It's vital, the only touches the spectators feel are those that you want them to feel. So when you lean in, if you're wearing a jacket, do your jacket up, or take the jacket off, because you will have a situation where as you lean in, the jacket opens up like this. Now, the spectator, if that were to happen, will probably be able to discern the difference between a physical touch and a piece of fabric, but just don't take the risk. Do the jacket up, take the jacket off. Left foot planted between the two spectators. You're leaning over. You now put your fingers in the air and you snap your fingers in this kind of strange position. The reason for this position is because what it's going to achieve and what it's going to create for you now. This is what's happening. You snap your fingers, the three spectators will close their eyes. In your mind, pause for a few beats. You now lean even further forward, but allow your arms to come back to a natural resting point, which is here. As I am looking in this direction, seemingly to check that these two spectators have their eyes closed, I am really touching this spectator on the back. So from here, I come down, I look in this direction, and as I'm looking that way, remember, if we want the audience to look at something, we look at it ourselves. So we want them to look away from any movement that's happening over here. So I snap my fingers, I come in, I'm now touching this person. And I'm not subtle about this. I really make sure that I know that they have felt me touch them. And I don't touch them once, I touch them 3, 4, 5 times. I don't have a set number, I just keep tapping until I feel I'm ready to move on. So you're in this position, you look down the line, you tap over here. Now you look in this direction and you tap over here. So you have now secretly touched 2 spectators. The audience are unaware of this. It happens in a very short space of time. The reason that you pause after you have snapped your fingers for a couple of beats is to allow the spectators on stage to understand that we are now beginning. Because remember, they have their eyes closed. So if you were to rush the transition between snapping your fingers and then touching them, they may just not realise they've been touched because they're not aware that things are beginning, which will lead to confusion later down the line. So you need to leave a pause here, and then come in and look down the line. Look in this direction, touch this person on the back. Look in this direction, touch this person on the back. You'll now move way around the line to the outside of this spectator, and in very big actions, touch that person on the shoulder. So you will now have a situation where this person has felt you touch them, this person has felt you touch them, and this person has felt you touch them. You will now give the following instruction. If you just felt me touch you, you are player number 1. This means that we're now addressing 3 people, while the audience believe we are only addressing 1 person. Whatever I say from this point onwards to player number 1 is an instruction that's happening to everybody on the stage. Now, if I can control what player number 1, collectively player number 1, is thinking, I can create a human version of the tossed out deck, of David Hoy's classic tossed out deck. So I choose, in my handlings of the tricks, to use different approaches to this. The first approach is to use a psychological force. Now, I think very frequently when magicians talk about psychological forces, they find themselves very, very intimidated and very nervous about those particular methods. There is this idea that we have a set of words that are somehow magical. And if we say those words in that order, it will create the thought that we wish the spectator to have. I think that's really the wrong approach. I think we picked a wrong name for a psychological force. We should have called it invisible restrictions, because that's truly what a psychological force is. A psychological force isn't using crazy words to create some hidden reality because of some super secret Jedi mind trick. It's really about eliminating potential choices until only those that we wish are left, the most common thoughts. So a big problem with the psychological force will be, at least in my experience of watching them performed, a big problem will be that the the magician comes to use the psychological force, and very suddenly all of their language, all of their tone, all of their vocabulary, and all of their delivery completely snaps to a different style. It's almost as if they're reading the words from the page of the book. This is the kiss of death when it comes to these techniques, because these techniques need to be applied invisibly. And if you suddenly change your delivery tone and style, you're doing the exact opposite of what the method needs to make it successful. If the audience suddenly are alerted to a change, they might not know why, but they will feel as if something is happening, and that will put them on high alert. In that moment, it's impossible to really use the force effectively. So my language for the force, I'll take you through it, but it will not be the right choice for you. You will need to rewrite it in your own style and your own tone for it to be really effective. But nonetheless, this is what I say. I say, if you just felt me touch you, you are player number 1. I would like you to think of 2 simple shapes, bearing in mind that with my artistic skill, a heart and a star would be very complicated, a square would be simple. Don't think of any of those, but think of 2 simple shapes. So let's break down what we've really just said. I've really just said, don't think of a heart, a star, or a square. I've then asked you to think of 2 simple shapes. Really, the only 2 options that are left are a circle and a triangle. However, there is an extra thing that we're going to do at the end of the trick during the revealing of information that will cover even the potential of somebody not effectively following the psychological force. So in theory right now you have 3 people that are thinking of a circle and a triangle. Let's look at that language. I would like you to think of 2 simple shapes, bearing in mind with my artistic talent a heart and a star would be very complicated. Now I say this only because I have a number of stars tattooed on my face. You can't see them all right now because I have a beard, but you can see one. So I have a number of stars tattooed on my face, and I also have lots of hearts on my arms. And I began to notice, over the years at least, as these tattoos appeared, people would start thinking of hearts and stars. Now I don't know if there's any true relationship between this and what was happening, but I do know that it's starting to happen for me, and I also know that it doesn't happen for a lot of other people. Very rarely during this classic psychological force will people report to me that they have people thinking of hearts and stars. So I realised I needed to address that in some way. The good news for you is, unless you plan on going and getting stars and hearts tattooed on your face in order to do my force, which would be a mistake, you probably won't need to say heart and star. And this is why it's so important that you think about the language you will use and how you will say it. For many of you, you won't need to include as many restrictions as I do. I would say that by including the heart and the star restriction, it does, again, push the spectators further towards the area you need them to be. But I'll leave it up to you. Experiment with the classic psychological force and discover what you might need to add in to make it effective. For me, heart and star, I have to eliminate those, otherwise they will crop up. As I say, I've got no real way of knowing if there is a relationship between the star on my face and people thinking it, but from experience, I now choose to include that restriction. I now continue. With my artistic talent, a heart and a star would be very complicated. A square would be simple. Don't think of that. Don't think of any of those, but think of 2 simple shapes. So thanks to the psychological force, you should be in a situation where all 3 of the spectators are thinking of a circle and a triangle. We'll come back to what happens should any of them not be thinking of a circle and a triangle at the end, because we need to keep moving forward with the basic method. So at this point, 3 people, each thinking of a circle and a triangle. We are now going to do something very bold. It's literally the opposite of the bold deception you did at the beginning. At the beginning, you secretly touched people without the audience realising. You're now going to pretend to touch people, but not really touch them, while the audience believes you are touching them. So, yet again, we're reminded that the world exists because of dichotomy. So, we have touched these 2 spectators. We have openly touched this spectator. Now, all 3 spectators have been thinking of the circle and a triangle thanks to the psychological force. We've repeated the important instruction. You are player number 1. Your job is to focus only on the 2 simple shapes. Ignore what the other players up here are doing. I now move to the middle, behind the middle spectator, and I make a very big gesture as if I'm touching the spectator. In truth, I just don't touch them. I leave maybe an inch or 2 inches between the end of my finger and the spectator's body. So it appears as though I'm touching them. I'm not. I immediately move away. Now, Very often throughout this trick, I will find myself moving around the spectators, standing off to the right-hand side, standing off to the left-hand side, and constantly addressing them. Because in this way, we don't fall foul to a potential problem. If you spend too much time standing directly behind a person while speaking, they will get a sense that you are speaking directly to them. So you need to keep moving so that your instructions are coming from generally different directions, and all three people are being kept included, so they always feel as though it's them that's being directly addressed. So I touch the spectator and then I quickly move away and I continue my instructions to the spectator from normally the right hand side, somewhere over here. I recommend that you do look again at the performances to see how all of these elements eventually come together. Now we have a wonderful situation. We have just touched the spectator on the back according to the audience's perception of what's happening. In reality, we have touched no one. So we've now created an invisible human being. And the easiest mind to read is the mind of our invisible friend, because whatever we say that person is thinking is exactly what it is that they are thinking. So I now continue with the instructions. I say, if you just felt me touch you on the back, and I change the direction, I change the position of the touch slightly. So initially I say, if you just felt me touching on the back, you'll play a number 1. If you just felt me touching on the shoulder, you'll play a number 1. If you just felt me touching on the back, I switch it up as much as possible to keep making it sound as if each thing is its own entity. So I say, if you just felt me touch you kind of on the shoulder, well, the back of the shoulder, you'll play a number 2. By using that language, it sounds distinctly different from player number 1 and player number 2, at least in the audience's perception of the situation. So now we're talking to an invisible person. Player number 2 does not exist. You are making them up. Everybody on the stage is player number 1. Everybody is thinking of a circle and a triangle. I now say, player number 2, I would like you to think of a name that you say every day. And now comes a really silly joke, and I'm not bothered about the joke, I'm not looking for laughter, but something really astonishing happens in this moment, and I would guarantee you saw it when you watched the performance. I say, I would like you to think of a name. It can be any name you would like, maybe a loved one, maybe a significant other, perhaps your parole officer, whoever it is that you have to speak to on a regular basis. Now in England, a parole officer, it's not a good joke if you have to explain it, but nonetheless, in England, a parole officer is somebody that you would report to had you been in some kind of trouble with the police. So it's an obvious kind of silly, it's hardly high-end humour, and it's not a particularly well-written joke, but it's not meant to be any of those things. It's a kind of, it raises a smile, and that's all it's meant to do. And the reason it's meant to do that is it's very deceptive in this moment when, and it will happen continually, and I guarantee you saw it, the audience believes you're addressing the spectator in the centre, spectator number 2, so I say, I'd like you to think of a name that you say every day, perhaps a loved one, a significant other, a parole officer. In that moment, when this spectator smiles, you assume, as the onlooker, that this person is smiling because he's aware I'm making a joke at his expense. He's aware that I'm playfully making a joke with him. This is not true, of course. The fascinating thing is that while you see this person smile, you don't see this person and this person also smile. You inherently hone in on the middle guy because that's who we're talking about. And that smile further solidifies the idea that he is being directly addressed. I think this is a fascinating thing and so interesting to me that just a smile could be so deceptive in that way. But it's really worth building into the routine because when it happens, it will happen most times, it really adds another layer of deceptiveness. It creates a strong link between spectator number 2, who, remember, is invisible, and the person who the audience believe is spectator number 2, and that's the goal. The goal is to constantly create the notion that these 3 people are separate and are really being given the instructions. So I repeat the same instruction that I gave to player number 1. I do this for 2 reasons. 1, consistency of language, but also 2, it's a way of indirectly reminding player number 1, all of them, that they should not be thinking of anything else. So I say, think of that name, hold that name in your mind. Your job is to only think of the name. Ignore what the other players up here are doing. So at this point in the routine, if somebody has suddenly found themselves confused about whether they should also be thinking about a name, they're hearing the same instruction to this spectator that they moments ago received regarding the shapes. It reminds them that their job is only to think of the 2 shapes. Again, to be really clear, player number 2 does not exist. He's imaginary, he's not here, there is no player number 2. He's not real. Player number 3. So I move on. and I repeat the same actions. I pretend to touch the spectator. I really don't touch this person. I walk away and I give the final instruction. If you just felt me touch you kind of on the shoulder, you're player number 3. I would like you to think of a year or a date. Now this is an intentional slip of language. I say I would like you to think of a year or a date. Because when I come to reveal it, I'm going to reveal a year. And I think that this language, yet again, creates a potential for the audience to further and strengthen the link that they see with this person. Because it appears as though this person has followed my instructions really well. And I'm going to continue with that language later on in the script. So I say I would like you to think of a year, well, a date that holds some significance to you. It can be anything you would like. So that's an intentional slip of the tongue, as it were. I now move away and I asked all 3 people to open up their eyes. They all open up their eyes, and I normally do it with some open up your eyes to this warm applause or something like that, because you want to treat these people really well. You're giving them lots of instructions, you're expecting them to do lots of things very quickly, so make them feel like they're part of it. So now all 3 people have their eyes open. So let's do a quick situation check. The truth of the reality that we have is this. All of them believe they are spectator number 1, or player number 1 as I label them. All of them are thinking of either all of them are thinking of 2 simple shapes that we hope to be a circle and a triangle, but potentially isn't, and we'll come back to that again at the end. That's the reality of the situation. The audience believes that this person is thinking of a circle and a triangle, this person is thinking of a name, and this person is thinking of a date. There is nobody thinking of a name, there is nobody thinking of a date. We're now going to come to the revealing process, but before we get there we have to do a check. The check that I do, I walk along the line and I say, you thought of one concept, you ignored what the other players were doing. This is really important because a common problem with this trick that I've encountered in other performers is that when they're giving the first instruction, they haven't been clear enough that this spectator, which is all of them, should only be thinking of 2 shapes. And then by the time we've given all the instructions, they're in a situation where somebody is thinking of 2 shapes, a name and a date, which obviously will create failure when it comes to revealing the information. So I want to clarify here that they have only thought of one concept, one idea and one thought. So I walk along the line and I say, you thought about one thing, you ignored the other players. You thought about one thing, you ignored the other players. You thought about one thing, you ignored what the other players were doing. Yes. Each person confirms. I'm now strong moving forward, safe in the knowledge that they only are thinking of 2 simple shapes, the thing that I instructed them to do. Now, should they not be thinking of 2 simple shapes, you're going to have to do some verbal reworking, and we'll come back to that later on. But honestly, as long as you're clear about each one of the details, you won't find that situation happening. I'm confident with the language that I use and the way that I deliver the information to the spectators that I really could move past this point without checking, but I just always check. I just see there's no reason not to be safe in the knowledge that it's working as you planned. Now we come to reveal the information. I have the 3 spectators stand up and I have them think about their thoughts in whichever way you would like. You can, go for the psychological approach, you can, do some tea leaf reading, whatever it is that's interesting and part of your style. You're now going to reveal the information as follows. Frustratingly, this evening, the thoughts that are normally the easiest, the 2 shapes, were actually the most difficult. So if I get even one of the 2 of the shapes correct, you will count it as a success. Now, as I deliver this, I'm delivering this instruction to all 3 people by standing in the center and during my language, moving eye contact up and down the line. Because remember, they all believe they're thinking of 2 shapes. So this instruction must cover everybody up here. So I'll repeat it one more time. Frustratingly tonight, the thoughts that were normally the easiest were the most difficult, the 2 simple shapes. So if I get even one of the 2 shapes correct, you will count it as a success. However, the name and the date were very clear. The thoughts that came to me were a circle and a triangle, the name Laura, and the date was just a year, 1985. If I named your thought, please sit down. And now all 3 people will sit down. Now remember, of course, Laura and 1985 can be whatever you want them to be. They're not really here. So you can change this name. One night it could be Laura, the next night it could be Peter, the next night it could be Dominic, whatever you want it to be. And the year equally can be changed regardless of what this spectator is thinking, because nobody's really thinking of a date. So in the performance of this trick last night, I actually used 1987 as the year. Now the reason I did that was because moments before, for the same audience, I'd just revealed somebody's exact date of birth and they were born in 1985. So I didn't want this trick to be, again, me revealing 1985. But with the flexibility of the method, in real time you can change that information if you need to. So that's the reveal language. At this point you should have all three people sitting down, and I would be very surprised if you follow each one of the details and each one of the specific scripting points if that were not the case. And the main reason for this, the main safety, is in the way that you reveal the two shapes. By saying, frustratingly, the thought that was normally the easiest tonight was the most difficult, the two shapes. So if I get even one of them correct, you will count it as a success. We have skyrocketed chances for success, because if this person happens to be thinking of a circle and a dodecahedron, even though that's not a simple shape, you are still correct. If this person happens to be thinking of a triangle and a hexagon, you are still correct. If this person's thinking of a circle and the number 5, if they've gone completely rogue on you, you are still correct, because you only need to get one of the two correct. And remember, during the psychological force, we eliminated a square, a heart, and a star. So the likelihood of them thinking of anything other than a circle and a triangle is almost nil. At this point, there should be no problem. This is only true if we follow each of the small details. Absolutely, each detail builds upon the next, and if you miss one, it's highly likely the trick won't work. You must follow them in a clear sequence of events. So, to make that a bit easier, I'm going to do a recap of what's happened until this point. Once you really understand each one of these elements, the whole thing becomes very easy to comprehend and really get into. So we have three spectators join us on the stage. We look for the following details: a single layer of clothing, no big jackets, no big sweatshirts, nothing like that. We have each of them sit on the chairs. We ask them to put their feet flat on the floor and relax back into their seats. We now move into this position. We move across and over. We snap our fingers. We come back into this position here. This is vital, and this positioning is vital because it's what will hide the touching. If you weren't in this position, the touching would look like this. This is very clear. So you must be in this position over them, because now when you come back, you look along the line, you touch over here, now you touch over here. You now move away from this position, move to the outside end of the chair, and with a very big action, touch the spectator on the shoulder. If you just felt me touch you, you are player number 1. This is everyone. I would like you to think of two simple shapes, bearing in mind that with my artistic talent, a heart and a star would be very complicated, a square would be simple. Do not think of any of those, but in your mind, focus on two simple shapes. Your player number 1, your job is to only focus your mind on the shapes, ignore what the other players up here are doing. I now move to spectator number 2, I make a very large action and I pretend to touch them, but I don't. I now move away so that I'm discussing and delivering the instructions from away from the spectators. If you just felt me touch you in the middle of the back, you're player number 2. I would like you to think of a name that you say every day, perhaps a loved one, a significant other, parole officer, whoever it happens to be in your life. At that moment, it's highly likely this spectator smiles, which again solidifies the connection between the thought and the person. I now repeat the instruction. You're player number 2. Only focus your mind on the name. Don't worry about what the other players up here are doing. I now move to player number 3. I pretend to touch them, I don't really touch them. I move away. If you just felt me touch you kind of on the shoulder, you're player number 3. I would like you to think of a year or a date. It can be anything you would like. Please hold those thoughts in mind, open up your eyes. I now move in front of the line with my back to the audience, and I confirm with each person that they are thinking of one concept. I do this very simply by saying, you have one thought in mind, you ignored what the other players were doing. Yes, they confirm. I now move to the reveal process. I do whichever presentation I want. You can stare into your teacups, you can read your tea leaves, you can use your psychology. You read some minds. We now come to revealing the information. I say, frustratingly, this evening, the thoughts that are normally the easiest were the most difficult, the shapes. So if I get 1 out of 2 correct, you will still count this as a success. This instruction, or this piece of information, is delivered to all 3 of the audience members that are on stage by standing directly in front of them and me holding eye contact with the entire line moving across the line. I now continue. However, the thoughts, the name and the date were very clear. The thoughts that came to me were a circle and a triangle, the name Laura, and the year 1985. If I named your thought, please sit down. And in that moment, I move away from the centre to the right, my right-hand side, so the audience can see these spectators, and I slowly deliver that line. So I say, if I named your thought, please sit down. And all 3 spectators sit down. That's the Cliff Notes version, that once you understand the big version of the trick, you should really get the way it's working here. The vital thing about the basic method is to really understand that there are many different realities that are existing within each moment of the trick. What your audience at large perceives as being truth is the complete opposite to what is actually happening up here on stage. So this trick shouldn't have been called touching on Hoi, it should have been called managing reality, because your job up here is to keep each one of the realities from becoming too blurred, but equally from blurring into each other. You want them to be distinctly separate, your deception versus the truth, but you want your truth and deception to be meeting so close that they're almost touching. That's the challenge. Your challenge is to manage each one of the realities that exist at all times. The only way to do this, the only way this trick will work for you, is if you sit there and think about what you're going to say long, long, long before you find yourself saying it in a performance. You must be 100% clear of why each element works in the way it does, and what wording you will use to achieve the element's goal. So, that's touching on Hoi. That's the basic version of the trick, and in a moment we'll talk about all of the different variations that you can do. Now you understand this core method. As well as that, we're going to talk in a little bit more depth and give you some examples of the secret touching and the false touching before we move into the other, I think, more developed versions of the trick. So now we come to talk about the second phase of the current way that I perform touching on Hoi, and I call this touching on divination. We love confusing magic methods, don't we, and with confusing magic names. So for me, touching on divination is a 2-phase routine with 3 on-stage spectators, which then flows into a mass audience Q&A. This is kind of the propless mind-reading act that you can take with you wherever you go. You just need 3 chairs and you're ready to go with an audience, and I think it looks really real and it feels really authentic to an audience as well. So the first 2 parts of that particular mini show are the first phase of touching on Hoi. I use this as a warm-up, so I bill it as being connecting with people, and then we move into the questions and answers, which is more emotionally significant. So phase number 1, as we've already talked, we have amazingly revealed the 2 simple shapes somebody is thinking of, a name they are thinking of, and then a year they are thinking of. I now have the same spectators on stage with me. They're sat down in their chair. Now here's a really interesting thought. After you've done the initial secret touching and labelling of the spectators, they're all aware of the fact that they are player number 1. This means that from this point onwards, you can address player number 1 and always be addressing all 3 of the people. So if you were to send them back into your audience, you could have all 3 of them stand up and you could still give the same instructions where you're nowhere near them. You don't have to do any more secret touching. I begin this routine by saying, one more thing, all 3 of you close your eyes for me. Player number 1, I would like you to think of a question that relates to your personal future. The kind of question you might ask a psychic or a tarot card reader. Make it the type of question that's not too far in the future, maybe just 1 year. Or language to that effect. Now remember, every single person up here is player number 1. So right now, every single person is thinking about a question that relates to their own personal future. I now say, player number 2, I would like you to think about a question that relates to your present. Resist the temptation to think of a silly question. Silly questions often receive silly answers, but a question that relates to you right here in the present moment, a question that you would sincerely like the answer to. Player number 3, I would like you to think about the past, a question that relates to your own personal history. After all, when it comes to our lives, what more is there for us to discuss than the past, the present, and the future? All 3 of you open up your eyes. So what we have now is a situation where the audience believes player number 1 is thinking about a question that relates to their personal future. Player number 2, who doesn't exist, is thinking about a question about their present, and player number 3, who again doesn't exist, we just think they're these 2 people as an audience, is thinking about a question that relates to their past. This means that when we come to reveal the information, if we can give an answer that is good for all 3 about their potential futures, we will have a human tossed out deck, but a human tossed out deck with much more personal significance, and truly I think is much more deceptive. We also get a huge luxury at this moment. We can create compelling and interesting answers for the present and the past. So let's talk about what it is that we do. I say, when it comes to the past, Now I go backwards. So in the instructions of the questions, I'm going future, present, past. Now in the revelations, I'm going past, present, future. So I say, when it comes to the past, the biggest mistake we can make is to continue to hold on to the bad feelings here in the present. If we continue to do that, it will define our future. So, I have an answer for your question. I feel that that person was not in possession of all of the information that they required to make the choice. I feel you've done everything you can do. This is a woman, the name Jenny or Jane seems significant, a J name certainly, and I feel like you need to let this go. You did everything you could. There's no point holding on to this idea here in the present. So, I've got to do a hugely personal reading already here. I'm including names, I'm including significant potential events. I'm playing this answer as if I'm sitting on the fence a little bit. I don't want to spill too much information about what this person's thinking about. I want to give just enough information to them that you as an audience will fill in a narrative in your own mind. So that's what I do with the past. Now with the present, I do something completely different. I say, this is interesting. With the present, I did ask you not to think of a silly question. I think you thought of more of a challenge than a silly question. Certainly a question that relates to your present. It couldn't be more present. I think your question was, what colour underwear am I wearing? I wouldn't ordinarily accept a challenge, but your underwear is blue. This is a really interesting answer to people and a really interesting moment in the trick. Technically this is telepathy more than it is answering a question, but I like the flow that we're going to create here. So now I move on to the future. Now this is the only question that really matters. Remember, if you wanted to, you could say, when it comes to the past, I feel that you eventually will have those actions catch up on you and they will discover the body that you buried in your back garden. I don't recommend that you do, because at the end this guy's going to confirm that the answer is correct. So you want to keep them vague. The only answer that needs to connect to anyone is the answer that connects to the future. The reason that this is so easy to do is my answer is meaningless. It really is literally the most meaningless answer you could possibly give. It will connect with everyone. I say, when it comes to the future, I believe you already know the answer. And I believe you are right. That's basically my answer. That's all I really say. I make it sound more flowery and I give much more surrounding language. My actual answer is this. When it comes to the future, I believe you need to learn to trust in your own intuition. I feel as if you already have the answer to your question and you're looking for validation. You don't need to find validation from outside sources. You need to trust in your own judgment. You know the answer to your question, and I believe it will end in the way you expect it to. Interestingly, I think it will end within 1 year from today. Of course it will end within 1 year from today, because during the setup for the questions, I asked them to think of a question that revolves around the next 12 months of their life. So I get to give a time frame that's accurate, because they followed my instruction, and basically my answer is saying, you know the answer, and I think it'll end the way you think it will. That's all I'm saying there, but I make it sound more flowery. I now say to the 3 people on stage, if my answer connected with you, if you understood my answer, please return to your seats. And now all 3 people leave the stage and return to the audience. So again, we have full confirmation here. This is a really great centerpiece questions and answers routine because it's got the frame of the past, the present and the future. This is going to give me a great lead-in to work with the audience in the gallery reading style, and this will allow me to jump between past, present and future logically. And we'll come back to that when we talk about the actual methods that I handle for doing the audience gallery readings. But this is the formal version of the trick. So you really have a mini show here with the first 2 phases of touching on divination, which is the traditional touching on Hoi at the beginning, where you reveal the 3 individual and distinct thoughts of 3 spectators. That's a demonstration of telepathy. You now move into a centerpiece or formal demonstration of questions and answers with the past, the present and the future. And now you're hitting blast off, lift off, you're working with everybody in the room. It's a really nice structure and it requires 0 props. So, that's touching on divination. It's my favourite version of the trick. It's the version of the trick that I think is the strongest. And I think when you put all of it together, you get a really solid, prop-free demonstration of mind reading. So now we find ourselves at the version of touching on Hoi that allows you to produce the illusion of a spectator as mind reader. To be honest, I could have probably spent 10 DVDs talking about all of the different versions of touching on Hoi. I've used it over the years to create drawing duplication routines, false hypnosis routines, amnesia routines, which is going to be an element that we'll talk about within this trick. Lots of different things. These are my favourite handlings and the handlings that I'm use the most, to be honest, and that I think are most interesting to give you a kind of dip into all of the different things that are possible with this system. And if you really think about the core method, the idea of secretly touching two people, openly labelling one but labelling all three as being a kind of modular method that you can use to create different outcomes, I'm sure you'll come up with a whole bunch of things that I've never even thought of. So let's talk about the spectator as mind reader right now. This is actually a part of the routine that I don't really perform. I don't perform it for audiences very often. Many years ago I did, but more frequently these days I'm less attracted to the spectator as mind reader theme and premise. But it does academically give us a lot to talk about because of the interesting things that are possible when you use the touching on Hoy framework to create a spectator as mind reader. So one more time, I'm going to keep beating this over your head. I'm sure you've already got it in there, but we'll go through the beginning process here. We will be using the secret touching process again if it's being done as a individual piece, as I did in the performances. I didn't want to put the spectator as mind reader into the middle of my normal sequence of touching on Hoy, where you reveal thoughts, then touching on divination, and then Q&A. To have suddenly thrown in the spectator as mind reader in that would have really broken the flow, in my opinion. So I did it as an individual piece. However, remember, you could substitute any of these choices in a modular fashion and build them however you want. You could use the first phase of touching on Hoy to reveal the individual thoughts and then go on to do a spectator as mind reader, in which case, just as with the flow of touching on Hoy into the Q&A sequences, you wouldn't need to do the secret touching because you could just verbally instruct player 1, player 2, player 3. However, if you were going to perform it in isolation, you would once again use the secret touching to begin the process. So we'll just go over it for the sake of completion, and I'll do it nice and quick. 3 people are on stage. They all sit down. You ask them to relax back in their chairs, feet flat on their floor. You move in between these two. Foot gets planted in the centre. You snap your fingers, you move back, you look along the line. While you're looking this way, you touch this way. While you look this way, you touch this way. You move, you openly touch this spectator and label this spectator as player number 1. You instruct them as follows. You will be the beginning of our journey with our new mind reader. I would like you to think of a red balloon. It's that simple. Do not focus your mind on anything else. Ignore what the other players are doing. Focus only on a red balloon. Now, I've always said that when it comes to mentalism or mind reading effects, there's kind of umbrella methods that we can, or umbrella terminology for methods. I always like to think of things in terms of how can I ask and how can I tell. And these are my 2 separation lines between the methods that are available to me to acquire information or to produce the illusion of knowing. So, if we think about this, almost all technique breaks down into one of these 2 categories. For example, if we were to do a centre tear, that's simply one step removed from actually asking somebody what it is they're thinking. If we were to look at the Dunninger principle, something we've already discussed in this DVD set, that really is directly asking. If we were to force a card on somebody, that's only one step removed from directly telling. In this instance, we are just telling all 3 people what to think. They're all player number 1, and we tell them to think of a red balloon. We'll come to how we tidy this up and make it make sense at the end. We now come to the false touch. We are not really touching this person, and we ask them to think of a landmark somewhere in the world. We now come to the final person, a false touch. We do not touch them, and we ask them to think of a number between 1 and 10. So the audience now believes this to be the situation. This person is thinking of a red balloon, this person is thinking of a landmark, this person is thinking of a number between 1 and 10. In reality, everybody is thinking of a red balloon because you told them to. It literally could not be easier. Now we come to the revelation process. Remember, you won't be revealing the information, somebody else will. Somebody that you say will have the power to read minds. I have that person come up onto the stage. I ask them, do you realise you have this power? Whatever playful interaction you would like with them. I now touch them on the forehead. This is an important point because you're going to get a free effect at the end. So I touch them on the forehead, I have them close their eyes, and I have them follow this visualisation process. I begin by saying, imagine a red balloon. See the red balloon floating away into the distance. In the background, you see a landmark. And then suddenly, the balloon pops, and you count how many pieces you see. It's a number between 1 and 10. Open up your eyes. In your imagination, where did you go? Which landmark did you see? She says, Egypt, the pyramids. How many pieces did the balloon burst into? A number between 1 and 10. She says 6. Now I think with this language, suddenly, the fact that we asked this person to think of a red balloon makes sense. I start beginning by saying this is the beginning of the journey. You're the one freebie. You'll be our beginning point, our departure on a mental journey, and all of those other phrases that I use when I'm performing. Look at the performance sequence and you'll see exactly what I mean. And again, over here, by using this visualization narrative of the red balloon floating away to see the landmark, finally bursting, and then you count the number of pieces, everything is tied together with this through line of the red balloon. So now the spectator will name the places that they went to in their imagination. For example, the pyramids in Egypt, and then a number, any number they want. And it can be anything. It really doesn't matter, because the audience believes this person is thinking of a place and this person is thinking of a number. They're not. Those two concepts are invisible. They don't exist. They're invisible friends. So it makes no difference whether those invisible people are mine or somebody else's. Whatever that person says will always be confirmed, because everybody is thinking of a red balloon. So when it comes to turning back to the audience members on stage, the three people in the chairs, I simply say, so if you were thinking of either a red balloon, the pyramids, whatever my spectator said, or the number 7, again, whatever my spectator said, I would like you to return to your seats. Of course, all three people will, because all of them are thinking of a red balloon. So your on-stage spectator gets the credit for apparently reading the minds of the three people on stage. Now, I mentioned the importance of touching the forehead to apparently give them the skill or the power to read minds. The reason for this is really simple. Within this trick, there are so many hidden realities, and I think some of the greatest magic is possible when we obscure the truth and then simply reveal the fact that that is true. So in this instance, we've created the illusion of a spectator reading minds. I now want the credit for the spectator not knowing how they did the trick, even though they don't know how they did the trick anyway. So I'm going to return to that spectator, I'm going to say you did a great job, I'm so pleased that it worked so easily for you. However, we have a problem. I can't release you out into the wild with the ability to read minds. So I need to take that from you. In a moment, I will touch you on the head, and you will believe that those thoughts simply popped into your mind for no reason. I now touch the spectator once more on the forehead, and I begin questioning them. I'll say, why did you think of the pyramids? They have no other answer than, I don't know, it just came to me. And I continue questioning them about this, and the more they repeat that sentence, it just came into my mind, the more quizzical I become about it, the more as if I'm checking to be sure, the more it looks like I have done something to affect their memory. Of course, they have nothing to remember. I'm getting the credit for making them forget something that they never knew in the first place. So by changing the perception of the reality and then simply revealing the truth of the reality, we get credit for an amnesia moment. It's a very small moment. I personally very much enjoy doing it, and I think there's something really interesting in that line of thought. It also neatly concludes this particular sequence in the touching on Hoy. Spectator as mind reader, gives it a nice bookend. So this is a way that you can use the original touching labelling process of touching on Hoy, rather than to produce a mind reading trick or a questions and answers routine, but as a spectator, as mind reader. So it's another way you can go with it. So now we come to the bigger discussion, the Q&A act, or questions and answers. This is something that I've been doing for pretty much my entire career as a professional mentalist without realising it. And only over the last maybe 5 years have I really paid strong attention to this becoming, for me, more or less the only trick I use in professional environments. So we're going to talk about it in general terms to begin with, and then I'll try and give you the specifics of how I've done the things that you've seen during the performance sequences in this DVD set. However, the most important thing to keep in mind, and I think this needs to be kept in mind at all times, is that these are not easily compartmentalised methods. They are instead universal systems or universal approaches. And the truth of the matter is that there is no one magic bullet. I know that you're sitting there wishing that there was a magic pill that you could swallow that would allow you to make these techniques work, but it doesn't really work like that. It's about, I believe at least, it's about creating an arsenal of mental systems that you can then put into play at the right moments within your show. It's also about being so comfortable with those systems and so comfortable with the material that you use that you can intersperse those systems easily, and you can move in any direction that you need to move in during the performance. So we'll start by talking in general terms. The questions and answers act that you saw me perform in the performance segment of the discs was done as the third phase to the touching on divination sequence, that sequence being the initial touching on Hoy routine, in which you read the minds of 3 spectators with the shapes, the name and the year, then going into the formal touching on divination, which is the middle phase of the routine where you answer 3 questions, as we've already covered, and then you'll remember it spills out into the audience, so you get this kind of lovely dynamic where you're giving what in the psychic world would be called gallery readings, where you're working with people at their seats, giving them personal readings. Now, I only did 3 or 4, I think maybe 5 different readings in the performance sequence, because it's really enough to give you a sense of the style and the flow of that trick. And for me to do any more than that probably wouldn't have been that useful, because the way I do it will not be the way you do it. So we'll try and break it down first into the systems and then into the applications. So there are, I believe, 2 ways of knowing information, and I briefly touched on this previously. There are umbrella terms that I use to collect method, technique, mechanism, whatever you want to call it. The first is asking, the second is telling. How can I ask somebody something about themselves? How can I tell them what they're thinking? Now, when it comes to most Q&A, you're very rarely going to be telling anyone what to think, because you're going to be asking, you're going to be discovering things. So there are different ways of discovering things. The thing that underpins my approach to Q&A stronger than anything else is the work that I've done in updating and personalising and becoming comfortable with George Anderson's Dynamite Mentalism, which is a seminal book and a seminal concept. So if you've not encountered this before, you absolutely will need to read George Anderson's Dynamite Mentalism, and as you read it, you will probably think to yourself, oh, all of this stuff is so outdated and all of this stuff is so old that it's not useful. That's a real mistake, because what George Anderson gave us was a brilliant framework and a brilliant insight into the way in which we can structure Q&A. He also gave us what I think is the ultimate method. It's left in our hands to update it, and sadly that updating, the work that you'll need to do, will be different for you than it is to me. It will be based on where you're from, where you perform, the audiences that you perform for, the performance environments, the setting, all of those things. So if I were just to give you a big collection of lines, which is what mentalists seem to think readings are about, is about memorising lines of information. I believe it's completely the opposite, but that would be so counterproductive to you, and you would find it impossible to put those lines into action. So what I hope to give you during this conversation about Q&A is really the systems for you to go and build for yourself, and it will be a long road. There will be many shows where you attempt to do this, and for whatever reason you don't feel like it's right, or you can't get into the right mindset, or you can't make it flow. But if you do it 100 times, by time 101 it will be phenomenal, and you'll love it, and you'll have a technique that you can keep with you for the rest of your life in all the other tricks. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that I've been performing Q&A every single time I've done a mind reading show. Now, I think you've been doing the same, and I just think perhaps you don't know that. I think every single time you've done any trick where you're revealing information, you've actually been having little training wheels to jump up into the big leagues of Q&A. So every time you've revealed a word from a book, every time you've revealed the name that somebody's written on a billet, all of what you've learned there, all of what you've collected there, all of what you've been doing with those formal mind reading tricks is instantly applicable into the performance of questions and answers. It just requires a kind of intellectual shift to understand how you apply those systems. So I'm going to talk about my core method, which is the George Anderson Dynamite Mentalism technique. And then going to talk to you about something that I call the reader's alphabet, which is based on Ken DeCourcy's incredible notion of creating essentially an alphabet of topics to read about. And then I'm going to also talk briefly about an imagined oracle. This is probably my most powerful reading method, an imagined oracle, and then a whole bunch of kind of secondary or supporting techniques, and these include guessing, these include natural intuition. I know, it's shocking, isn't it? And a DVD full of tricks, suddenly there's the real work, the intuition. A good example of this will be during the Living and Dead test, and I'm fully prepared for everybody listening to this to say to me, oh, well, that's obviously not true, but it is. And if you were here with everybody that was working on this DVD set, they would clarify and back me up on this. During the performance of the Living and the Dead routine, I intentionally leave a moment where I will make a guess. A pure random guess based on what I think I should be saying at that moment, based on whatever image comes into my mind in that moment. And in the performance I mentioned an elephant, and the spectator immediately connected that to his child, and then I could form a narrative based on that gave me the reveal. I'm very pleased that was on film, because ordinarily when I talk about this, people will say to me, oh, well, obviously that never works. So I'm very pleased that we filmed it working, because you see it in action, and now I've got it on film. I'm prepared for people to say, oh, well, that's not what you were doing. But it was. The reason I choose to leave a gap in that routine for me to include a genuine moment of intuition, or a genuine moment of guessing, if you want to use a less pleasant word for it, is that there's enough hard acquired information, enough information that I've got from the billet, that should that guess have been wrong, I could have very easily stepped straight past it. But leaving the space to make the guess will allow very frequently miracles to occur. So that's kind of another point that's worth remembering. So we'll cover dynamic mentalism, an imagined oracle, the reader's alphabet, and also some supportive techniques such as literally guesswork, or perhaps sensational answers to questions, and a whole bunch of interesting stuff. So let's begin. George Anderson, as I've mentioned, gave us this fantastic concept of dynamic mentalism, which in essence is understanding that many different people go through very similar experiences based on their demographics, so things like age, sex, culture. For example, a man in his early 20s will highly likely be looking at his professional life with far greater focus than perhaps his romantic life. Basically a generalisation about a person. Now, most of George Anderson's generalisations in his book are now no longer true. I always remember the one that makes me laugh about, in George Anderson's book, he's talking to a woman in her mid to late 20s and mentioning how she's got much stress right now because she's not sure whether she should take things further with a man. And you just realise how quickly culture changes, you know. But anyway, making generalisations based on age ranges is a really powerful thing to do, and then constructing readings based on those age ranges. Some great resources for you to do that. The first book is Passages by Galshini. This is a book that is subtitled Predictable Crises in Adult Life. This is a book written by a psychologist that examines the common traits that we will encounter as our life continues and our life grows and we age. Obviously, the concerns of somebody in their early 20s are very different to the concerns of somebody in their mid-50s. If you view it in that way, you start to realise that you can create overarching readings for individuals. For me, I turn, for example, a reading for somebody in their early 20s, a man, I will always focus on career. Now, with career, with the way everything works in the world right now, my readings for career will always be something along the lines of, the first feeling I get about you is that you're the project junkie, you're the guy that gets this great surge of adrenaline early in a project, but your problem more or less is encountered towards the middle of the project where all of those feelings start to slip away, and then suddenly you crave that excitement of starting afresh and starting new. So you find yourself being split, and your attention being split from one project to the next. You need to learn to really follow through with the projects that you begin with. So I think, you know, we can all think back to a time in our life when everything was exciting, everything was new, and everything was shiny. You know, a great sentence, especially when it comes to magic, is the idea's easy, but the execution's hard. So everybody's full of ideas, but it's the execution that really, you know, is the challenge. So it's very predictable that men in their early 20s are going to be kind of like that, early to mid 20s. But then equally, I will start using other techniques alongside the George Anderson approach to things. So at the core of everything, I've got my they're not memorised. This is another thing, they're not memorised. Because if you memorise stuff, like if you read books on cold reading, it tells us to say, you know, ridiculous things like Barnum statements, like at times you can be the life of the party, but other times you're quiet and introverted. I don't think this is deceptive if it's done like that. I think it sounds more like comedy than it does anything else. I think it's very clear to an audience that you've said one thing and then said the exact opposite. I think those kinds of statements are very difficult to make in a deceptive way. For me, the kiss of death with all of this is to have lines that you've memorised to then later regurgitate. I don't think you should be memorising cold reading scripts. I think you should be creating themes that you are able to passionately talk about and themes that you're able to connect to other people around you. So you have, in my mind, better than memorising the readings that George Anderson presented is to look at the themes that he found to be universally connected to audiences. So they're themes such as travel, health, education, sex and love, careers, ambitions and goals, and money. These are pretty much covering everything anybody could ever need to cover. Herb Dewey, another fantastic writer on these subjects, originated the very easy acronym the SCAM, or matches, depending on which one you prefer, to help you remember these specific areas of interest in people's lives. So travel, health, education, sex, love, career, ambition and money. If you really were to structure one reading around each one of those themes, you would pretty much be talking to everybody in the room, more or less. So I have a base kind of collection of themes that I wish to talk about. Themes that I think will connect with people, but they're not plotted word for word. I've not worked out, I will say this, this, this and this. Now, of course, over time, you find yourself delivering certain things that you like the sound of, and then suddenly they become kind of refrains, as it were, or little licks that you've got that you can start building together with other things. So that's the first layer that I think is vital that you master. Just get some themes in your head and link those themes to individuals. The second great skill for Q&A, and the second skill that's required, is actually looking at people in the audience, actually really looking at them and making assumptions. Now, I want to be clear here, this isn't some pie-in-the-sky method. I'm not suggesting that you really become Sherlock Holmes and you suddenly use real deduction, or you really become, some kind of psychic and really use psychic power. But I do think every single person has the opportunity to look at another person and make some kind of obvious observations about the people in front of you. A good example of this will be in the performance sequence. I worked with a woman who had lots of tattoos and stretched ears and very striking makeup and a very kind of outlandish outfit. It's pretty obvious to me that she's a creative type of person. She's expressing her creativity literally in the way that she lives her life. So it's very easy for me now to go to a theme. So my theme with her is going to be creativity. That's my first theme. I'm then going to always look for ways that I can contrast with another theme. So I know, because of her age range, she looked like she was in her mid-20s to me. And this is an interesting thing. Sometimes I'm way off with my age ranges, and yet the readings still hit. I don't really know what that means, but nonetheless, she looked like she was in her mid-20s to me. So I've already made an assumption about her that she's kind of creative. I now look to my themes that I think about in the mid-20s, and I think one big problem for women and men in their mid-20s is a struggle for control and a struggle for them trying to find their place in the world. They think to themselves, where am I going to be? How can I get there? And they look to people that are far further ahead of them in career or in life. And the gap between where they are and where these other people are seems so massive that there's fear that perhaps they won't get over the mountain. Maybe they won't be able to make that climb. So now I've got two themes for me to contrast in my reading with that woman. I talk about creativity, but I also talk about fear of her not achieving her best work. So suddenly I'm building a small narrative in my mind, and I'm talking to her as if I was talking to myself based on my own experiences. I use my own personal experiences and the experiences of those around me to inform what people may feel, as well as things like passages. And I read a lot of women's magazines, which are fantastic for this. Lots of like Cosmopolitan and things like that talk about emotions and feelings very often. They also have these incredible surveys consistently where it says things like 75% of women believe that. That's good stuff. If 75% of the people that read their magazine believe it, you should remember that. So for me, the readings are about finding themes and contrasting themes. So that's the very first thing that's happening. And we'll build all of this up, and we'll start actually producing a reading as we go after we've done an overview of the system. And there are other hard methods of information acquisition that I do use, and we will get to those. So if you're sitting there desperately waiting to know how you know the name of someone, it's coming, but it's also less important. So, and you'll be surprised by how little of that is used in the entire sequence. So, the next thing that I do is an imagined oracle. Now, the greatest thing you can do, in my opinion, is to stop trying to learn how to do this by trickery and start learning how to do it for real. Now, when I say for real, I mean take a system that existed long before us, such as tarot cards, and learn them. Learn them inside and out. Learn and associate meanings to those tarot cards. Learn and associate keywords to those tarot cards. Once you've done that, you don't need to be looking for tricks anymore, because these systems have existed for years and they have given information that genuinely connects with people. You're no longer worried about creating, a Barnum statement followed by a reversed never was prediction, or whatever the phrases that you've encountered are. It becomes far less formulaic because it's a free-flowing exchange of information. And the other great thing about having an imagined oracle such as tarot cards, again in the performance sequence, I think I did this, I hope I did because I wanted to talk about it. I very often say to somebody, it's interesting, when I look at you I see a tarot card, it pops into my imagination. When I look at you I see, and then I talk about it. I did do this with the High Priestess. So I said, when I look at you, I see a tarot card. The card that I see when I look at you is the High Priestess. And now I get to just describe what that card means. and the ways in which that might connect with the person. So there's no trick here. There's no trick. I have memorized tarot cards in my mind. I'm imagining that they are being shuffled, I'm seeing one, and then I'm reading that card to somebody. I'm allowing the person I'm looking at to bring one of those cards to mind. Now, I'm not suggesting that there is some true psychic power happening here. I'm not thinking that, you know, in that moment I am psychically connected to them. I am thinking that this is a system of information, and that's really what matters. So even if you were to memorize, I just use major arcana cards as well, I don't use the minor arcana at all, but if I have this system, it gives me information to talk about. So when I see the high priestess, I can say, for example, and these will remain pretty constant for me because they've become locked in over time, but with the high priestess I might think about nature, because that's one of the things that she represents in the tarot cards. So straight away I have a theme. So let's remember, I'm constantly building themes based on assumption, based on age ranges, and then based on an imagined oracle. So right now we have a couple of themes here. We have creativity, we have a fear and a lack of control, a desire for control, a desire for progress and movement, and I have nature. And even if it were 6 months from now that I was doing this reading, it probably would be quite similar in terms of its themes to that spectator, because those are the things that come into my mind immediately. So I might start constructing a reading that revolves around the ideas of. The first feeling I get about you is that you're very creative. I get the sense that right now there are a number of things that you have in your mind, but you have a fear about actually accomplishing. There's something that's preventing you from moving forward with that very specific goal that you have in mind. You keep doing smaller projects, and you keep telling yourself that by doing those smaller projects you'll learn the details and the skills that you need to do the bigger project. I think in truth there's already somebody close to you, somebody that you know, that has their eye open. They've noticed your skills, they've noticed the things that is powerful and strong inside of you, and you can use that advice to create the outcomes you desire. I think you need to stop at looking at the progress of those around you and instead start looking at your own progress. Don't worry, you will get there. I also feel something very powerfully from you, and that is that you need to surround yourself in nature. I feel like there is a conflict right now. You feel like you're being hemmed in, you feel like you don't have enough freedom, enough movement, and enough space. Spend an hour a day in the park and suddenly you will feel far more fulfilled. Connect back to nature and allow it to inspire and inform your own creativity. So you can see out of nowhere, we've just created a very large, a very kind of specific sounding reading, and it is specific because I'm not trying to trick anyone. The great thing about the setup for the Q&A that I use is that by using the touching on divination sequence as the lead-in, I am now free to speak about the past, the present, and the future. If you really watch the performance sequence of the Q&A that I did, it's mainly about confirming and connecting. That's basically all it is. In that entire sequence, there are 2 pieces of hard information. There are 2 pieces of information that I knew about people in the room before the show began. And I knew those because I got hold of the guest list or the box office or whatever it happens to be, and I researched those people in any way I can. And I find out a couple of pieces of information. I only need 2 pieces of information, and now I can do 10 readings. Because you don't need to constantly be looking at people, with Q&A at least. With mass mind reading it's a different situation, but with real Q&A where you're answering questions or giving readings, you don't need to constantly be saying, and the name of the first person you kissed was. Because the truth of the matter is that's less interesting to an audience than talking about them, their hopes, their fears and their desires and what it is they wish to accomplish. But it's very useful to have that stuff to pepper up and spice up what's going on throughout the process. So let's get back to just the mental system as opposed to the hard information. So I have the George Anderson system, which is kind of at the bottom of everything. This is a collection of themes that I'm linking to demographics, whether they be age, sex, culture, etc. Common situations that will occur over our lifespan. On top of this, I have natural assumptions, things that I honestly feel based on the person that I'm working with. What do they strike me as? And again, I want to really make this sound rational. If you were to be speaking to a guy that was speaking with a really developed vocabulary, you would make a different assumption about him than perhaps somebody that grunted when you asked them a question. Those 2 things carry different assumptions with them. So you're making these assumptions at all times in your life. One of the things is you're probably not using those assumptions to inform and create the outcomes that you're surrounded by. So the assumptions, and then on top of this I have the imagined oracle, so the major arcana that I have linked to a number of keywords. In my mind, I've linked each one of the tarot cards to 4 different keywords. So for example, in my system, the Fool would be beginnings, spontaneity, faith and apparent folly. Those would be the 4 words that I use for the Fool. So if I, for some reason, saw the Fool in my mind and I was working with somebody in there, let's go for the opposite demographic now, let's go for somebody who's in their mid-50s. If for some reason I was talking to, let's say, a woman in her mid-50s and the Fool came into my mind, I could now say to her something along the lines of, I get a very strong sense for you that new things are coming. I feel like you've been looking at the world around you and you've realised that you have a lot more to add back in. It feels as if you've come to a natural point in your life where there's going to be a transition, but the transition isn't to be feared. The transition instead is to be welcomed. And you're going to have to learn one important lesson. The lesson that you're going to have to learn is to trust in your own intuition and your own faith, to trust in your own decisions and your own ability to guide you to new situations, because this journey that you're about to start, it will become frightening. It will be frightening because it will be the first time in your life that you feel you have total freedom, even though in the past you have imagined that that was the thing you desired the most. When you're suddenly confronted with the ability to do whatever you want, the fear is suddenly that you don't know what that is. You have a huge luxury. You have time, you have intelligence, and you have the ability to be guided and explore whatever things come your way with absolute knowledge that those things are working in your best interests. So that's just talking about the idea of beginnings. Obviously linked to somebody at a demographic, right? I was thinking about somebody approaching a retirement age and thinking about what they're going to do after retirement. So it's a huge volume of information, and delivered with a sort of caring tone and with authority, that reading will hit. Absolutely, that reading will hit. So that's what I'm doing on the basic levels. Then on top of this we have a bunch of sort of presentational techniques, just simply asking the audience to say yes, to confirm things, or perhaps not asking them to confirm things. One of the readings that I did in the performance sequence was a complete reading that was based on flattery, and there was no time that I asked the spectator to confirm anything. I didn't tell him anything about his life. I didn't tell him anything specific about his life. I didn't give him any information that could be right or wrong. I had him stand up and I said, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you that you've come a long way. That might seem difficult, and the reason that seems difficult to understand is that the change that's most difficult to recognise is the one that happens in a gradual way. You used to keep a journal, you used to keep notes. I want you, when you leave here this evening, to have a look back at that journal from several years ago. Contrast the person that you are today with the person that you was then. You will be astonished by the progress that you have made, and I need you to become happy and proud of the person that you now are. You have handled things that other people will have crumbled under. You're doing a great job. Give him a round of applause. I didn't ask him to confirm, although I'm pretty sure, given that reading, he wouldn't have said, actually, no, I'm a terrible person, I haven't grown in any way whatsoever, so flattery will go a long way. But in that moment, there's no traditional confirming or denying or anything. I'm just giving a reading. And in that moment, it appears as though we are talking about this person overcoming huge obstacles to the rest of the room, because the rest of the room is always looking for the best story. A very good friend of mine, Sebastian Clerge, says the best story wins, and I think he's right. And I think an audience instinctually looks to provide the best narrative for what it is that they're experiencing in that moment. So if I can give them enough information that they can begin to build their own version of events, it will always be better than me giving them all of the information, because they will create the story that they want in the moment. So maybe one person over here, when I was giving a reading about this man coming a long way, was actually thinking about, his recent divorce. Maybe he turned it into, this guy has recently had to come through a really bad relationship. Maybe somebody over here saw that same reading but thought it related to, a change of work, because this guy desperately wants to leave his job and move on to a new place. The narratives are really filled in by the audience's perception based on their own previous experience, as opposed to actually the reading itself. So for me, if I have two pieces of hard acquired information, for example, last night I knew the name of somebody's dog and I knew the name of somebody's daughter. That was it. I didn't go in with huge amounts of pre-show information or hot reading or any of that, because two pieces of information is enough for me to spike up in amongst the actual fair readings. And bearing in mind it's following straight after the experience the audience had last night in the performance was I opened with the handling of the tossed out deck, I then performed the living and dead test, and then I did the touching on Hoy, touching on divination sequence. So we've had enough normal mind reading, enough yes that's what I'm thinking of, that when it comes to the readings it feels completely different, and the feeling in the room will immediately change. People are always thinking to themselves, I want to be next, and they're not really looking for you to tell them the name of their grandchild or the name of their first kiss or any of that stuff, because the tone has changed entirely. But having two or three pieces of known information will really change the feeling in the room, because when you need to kind of drop the bomb, when you need the big moment, you can release that information. But your first goal, certainly your goal shouldn't be to release that information as quickly as possible. It should be to get as far as you can without any of that, and to create as best an impact without any of that as you can. In some performances, I've actually walked off stage and realised that I haven't revealed some of the information that I knew about people, because the performance has taken it in a completely different direction, and then I'm always frustrated with myself. I think, oh, I should have used that, but the truth is, obviously, I didn't need to use that because it moved in a direction organically and by itself. So again, let's just try and keep this kind of logical. I'm really aware that all of these techniques are so ethereal and so smoky that trying to put them together is kind of like trying to catch smoke. It's really difficult. So we have on the very lower level the George Anderson approach with the themes and the demographics. Then above that I have my natural assumptions about human beings, the things that I've learned from being alive for now 29 entire years. Based on that I've made some assumptions, and I hope by the time I'm 50 I'll know a lot more. And then on top of that we have the imagined oracle system. So for me I use tarot cards, but that could be anything. It could be anything that you're particularly drawn to. But I cannot stress the value in learning a real reading system. I think it will really improve what you do, and mainly because it will excite you and it will open your eyes to many different themes that perhaps you would never have come to without them. So I use Major Arcana, 22 cards, not that hard. With each one of the cards I attach 4 keywords, and those keywords give me the narratives that I wish to create in the moment. Then I have one more thing that we haven't yet spoken about in terms of mental systems. Now this is the Kenda Corsi inspired system, so the alphabet system. Kenda Corsi released a incredibly smart concept called the systematic seer. That was then popularised by Richard Webster, who wrote a book called Psychometry A to Z. In recent times we've had people like Neil Scryer publishing his versions. My good friend Jerome Finley, he's mentioned this concept in some of his work. I think since the many people, myself included, came to the concept through Richard Webster as opposed to Kenda Corsi, but Richard Webster really opened this up to many different people, and I think probably most people watching this, if you've been doing mind reading for any length of time and this sort of stuff is interesting to you, you probably already have your own system, because it's such an easy thing to implement and it's so powerful. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way I use that system, because I've sort of expanded it a little bit from what you might find in the commonly covered areas. I've never seen this imprint anywhere else, which probably means that huge groups of human beings have been using it since the beginning of time, and everybody in the world knew about it apart from me, but it's the way I handle the system. So the Kenda Corsi, the core concept of the Kenda Corsi idea, the systematic seer, is that it comes from a really interesting point. His point was, if you were to see a psychic reader, perhaps you were to have a palm reading, and then you were to meet that palm reader 5, 10, 15, 20 years later. In theory, many of the things that palm reader saw in your palm during the first meeting should remain the same the next time he meets you. Now, this becomes a challenge if you're not using a real system. If you're just making stuff up, if you're just using kind of what I think of as really sort of ugly and bumpy cold reading methods, that won't be true. It'd be very difficult for you to remember meeting that person even a year in the past, let alone 10 years in the past. So Kenda Corsi brought up this brilliant idea of creating an alphabet of keywords, so A through Z, and then taking each one of those letters and linking them to keywords. So in my system, A stands for activity. It also stands for abundance, but we'll talk about the way this works in a moment. In the original Kenda Course Notion, you then used the letters in the person's name to create the reading, because the next time you met them, you could ask their name without appearing to be suspicious. It's not an unusual activity, and yet the reading would remain the same. So when they told you your name, their name, you then had your reading. It's a real genius piece of beautifully elegant, simplistic, but utterly effective thinking. So let's say we were giving a reading for somebody called Ken. In my system, K stands for knowledge, and it also stands for knowable. So knowledge and known information, and these give me 2 themes. Then E stands for energy and enthusiasm. That gives me another 2 themes. And then N stands for negativity and new beginnings. So that gives me another 2 themes. So right now I have 6 themes that I can talk about with this person. Based on the fact that he's called Ken. But remember, I'm always going to be contrasting and comparing and trying to create a conflict between these issues, because where there's conflict, there's metaphor, and where we can create metaphor, there is a meaning that will be perceived by the person that's receiving the metaphor as a reading. So, for example, I might say, so the first thing I feel with you is that you're on a kind of personal journey to really understand the world around you. I think at times you find yourself in situations where you look at things and you really just can't understand why they're happening in the way they're happening. And I don't mean, you don't know how to make the DVD player work. I mean, you're at a point in your life where you are beginning to ask yourself really deep questions, and you're finding it challenging. You're looking for information from every side of you. You're looking for gurus, you're looking for answers, you're looking for scientists and mystics and sages, and you're looking for that understanding of the world around you. But I think this really relates to something that's happening on a much deeper level. I think you've been invigorated in a new way to understand yourself. But it's not just yourself, it's actually more about understanding your position and your place in the world around you. I feel like you've been recently sort of brought down by, I won't go into great detail about this person, but I feel like this person has brought some kind of negative energy to you, and I'm hesitant to say that word. I'm hesitant to talk about negative energy in any real way, but I'll say that we've all met those individuals where they walk into the room and suddenly the tone of the room changes entirely. And I think there's a person in your life right now, they're a little bit taller than you, and in fact they've got blonde hair, and they remind you of somebody from your past, somebody who was a little bit more controlling than them, but you can see shadows of that person from your past in this person in the present, and they're bringing you down. They're creating a scenario where you're desperate to find the answers to these questions. You want the answers to these questions, and you want discussions about these topics, but they just won't do it. They keep saying, just stick to the straight and narrow. I think the best thing that you can learn to do is to remove yourself from the negativity, not by removing that person from your life, in fact quite the opposite. I think there's much to be learned in their approach to the world, but the best thing you could do is use that negative energy to create a positive outcome. I think in helping that person, and instead of just looking at them and saying to yourself, oh God, I can't stand being around this person, you will actually learn the things that it is that you feel you need to find out. So this is an imagined reading. Obviously I don't have anybody here to work with one-on-one. It's an imagined reading for somebody called Ken. Now, something that's happening here, as I said, I'm literally taking the keywords and I'm contrasting and comparing each one of the themes to create a narrative. And that's the only way I can describe it. It's not about memorising lines, it's not about memorising situations, although in a minute I'm going to give you a whole bunch of lines to memorise, but it's not about memorising lines, it's not about memorising situations, it's about becoming comfortable with the creation of human narrative, with understanding the stories that exist and understanding the stories that commonly occur in our lives. So I have my Kenda Corsi system at the top here. Let's imagine this. I have A through Z. Each one of those words has a different keyword, but each one of those keywords also links to a different tarot card. So I have 2 sequences running at once. To begin with, I have A through Z. A for me is first activity and then abundance. Now the reason it's activity at the top is because this is just a natural theme that I can talk about. So for example, I look at the system and I think of A and I say to myself, activity. Now I will use as much as I can to talk about that particular theme without using the word activity. This is all Richard Webster. In fact, my original system is the reading for activities based on Richard Webster's Psychometry A to Z. It's so worth reading. So initially I have the activity reading. I might say something like, for me it feels like right now you're going through an intense burst of hard work followed by, for some reason, a kind of lull in the storm, but you've not yet learned to release yourself from the work side of things. So even when you're finding yourself at a period of time when you could take a moment to relax, you're instantly snapping straight back into the work mode, and this is going to eventually become a problem for you. Or something like that. Literally just taking the word activity, turning it into a narrative. So on the top of the layer I have just keywords. A is for activity for me, B is balance, C is compassion, D is determination, E is energy and enthusiasm. So that's my first line of the keywords. These are just themes to talk about. And then immediately underneath that I have a word that comes from my list of keywords that I've associated with the tarot cards. So for me, abundance relates to, well, it can relate to several different tarot cards, but in this particular system I relate this to the Empress. The Empress, of course, being the kind of motherly energy within a pack of tarot cards, mainly associated with abundance, nature, and sort of the senses in many ways, like a sensual, in the truest sense, not sexual, but involved in senses like touching and hearing and so on. So as soon as I'm now back through another system with a keyword to my tarot card, which is abundance, and now I'm straight back at a tarot card. So now I have activity and abundance, maybe an overwhelming amount of activity, but equally maybe it's an overwhelming amount of activity that's creating a sensory overload. So all of this is so hard for me to explain because it's happening instinctively and it's happening based on the systems that I've placed in my mind to tell stories. That's all you're doing. Q&A is telling stories. It's telling human narrative in a way that will connect with the people around you. So the more I try to control the process by logically understanding the system, the more stilted and stifled the actual outcome is. The truth is you should be getting to a point where you have the themes that you want to talk about and the ideas and the concepts that you want to use, and you're free to literally free associate human narrative. So once you've done your initial understanding and your initial research, you can now use these mental systems to guide you along the way when it comes to the instant creation of readings. And I'm not the first person to talk in this way by any means. As I've mentioned, Richard Webster's Psychometry A to Z is fantastic. Jerome Finley is as equally as passionate as I am about the idea of the imagined oracle. It was really Jerome that I think really brought this to the centre of people's attentions with many of his writings, and he does remarkable work with it. So in this way you are able to consistently create pretty interesting, pretty compelling and very specific sounding readings. So once you've got that mastered, the truth of the matter is you don't need anything else. That is absolutely the truth of the matter. Once you've got that mastered, you don't need anything else. There are, however, some other techniques that I do instinctively use and I did want to include on this DVD. And many of them are inspired by a very classic Thinking on Questions and Answers Act, and many of them have just been discovered as I've performed the Questions and Answers Act. So one of the things that I did in the performance last night was a sensational answer. This is an answer where I simply say, I do not believe it would be wise for you to identify yourself, however I do have an answer to your question. If you continue with the behaviour that you are exhibiting right now, they will find out. I think it's unreasonable for you to be concerned about him cheating on you when you're cheating on him. I don't ask for anybody to claim that, but it allows a really kind of sensational piece of information to be interjected within the questions and answers sequence. A major difference and a major departure from the way that I handle George Anderson's Q&A concept, and it was originally presented by George Anderson, is that rather than giving the themes first, I don't do the psychic thing of saying, oh, I pick up on somebody that's feeling very stressed out at work right now. Who is that? I don't give the theme and then ask the person to connect to the theme. I go to a person and then I use them to give me a theme. To me, this feels far more real than asking people to just claim these things. So the only time that I'll ever have a reading where I am not directly working with someone thanks to my own choosing is when I'm giving a sensational answer. So when I give a sensational answer, it goes unclaimed. So that's one technique that's very powerful. Another technique that I use very frequently is I'm monitoring the reaction that I'm getting during the reading. I'm seeing where I'm right and where I'm wrong. And I can't really describe this. I'm sure somebody will eventually write a magic book on some crazy micro expressions that will teach you how to do this. I won't be that guy and I won't read that book, but I'm sure it'll exist somewhere, and I don't think it'll be that useful because the more you try and teach these things, the more difficult they become to understand. You already know this, you already do this. Just from being a human being that's alive, that's managed to survive until this point, you have become very good at these things. So in a conversation, you can gauge whether the person is agreeing or disagreeing with the things that are being said. You do this all the time. You do this as a survival mechanism. So when I'm giving a reading, I can tell how accurate or how inaccurate the reading is based on what I'm getting back from the person. So a good example from the performance that I gave last night during the Q&A, I began a reading with a couple, and I very often do this. I very often spin the narrative and then pull somebody else in and then contrast and compare the narratives with that person, and then have them, you know, make some kind of declaration and statement and things like that. But that's just all presentation, and that's me. That isn't really what anybody else would do. But towards the end of that particular reading, I had created a kind of imagined narrative in my own mind that this was a highly creative man that started many projects but rarely followed through with them, was addicted to the adrenaline that was surging through at the beginning of the project, but it was really the execution that was the problem. I then brought in his wife, or his girlfriend rather, and I explained that she was somebody he needed to listen to more because she's encouraging, but they butt heads at times, and most of the time he doesn't realise the strength that she can give him. All of this is just good advice, isn't it? Like, shouldn't you listen to your partner a little bit more? Shouldn't you take their great strengths and use those to make you better? Isn't that what it's about? It's just kind of all good advice. There's nothing that difficult about it, is there? So in that moment, I then continued the narrative by talking about a project, and I ended the reading by telling him, after the reading had flowed really well, I said, good, you need to finish your book, take a seat, give him a round of applause. There was no option for him to confirm or deny that he was working on a book. I also didn't say he was writing a book. I said you need to finish your book. So perhaps he was reading a book on the way here. Now the audience at large probably turned that into a narrative based on what came before it, that this guy's writing a book, maybe he's writing the next great novel, because that's the best story, that's the story we want to believe. We want to believe that we're surrounded by intelligent, creative, brilliant people that are going to achieve brilliant things, and we were there the night when. The truth of the matter is that guy may have just been, I don't know, maybe he's got a book that he needs to finish reading. Maybe he's got a book that he needs to start reading. Maybe he has thought about writing a book, but he hasn't done it. Maybe his girlfriend has been telling him to write a book. There are many different possible options here, but if I don't see one of them immediately connecting, so in that moment I could just get a sense that he wasn't, you know, he wasn't on the final page of his novel, right? Like he didn't respond really strongly to that idea or that concept. So I saw that in that moment, and rather than push it, I simply said, sit down and give him a round of applause. And that was the end of the reading, because we're so invested in the narrative and we're so invested in the story that in that moment we've created a really strong connection as an audience, but also we've created, more importantly, a strong connection with the individual, because obviously he's been confirming up until that point and he feels as though you do really know him. So there's another technique that I often use, which is just simply don't ask for confirmation. And I think this combined with the system is really where you need to be heading. So using that system to be able to create really fast readings, really detailed and intricate readings, a good understanding of cold reading will help, like an understanding of why those techniques work. But more important than a good understanding of cold reading is a good understanding of language. Really become interested in language, become interested in the way that you can structure sentences, become interested in the way that you can involve people with language. I'm being kind of hesitant to recommend any one technique, because it's my personal experience, and I'm sure many of you will disagree with me on this, but it's my personal experience that the more I've tried to make this formulaic, the less effective it's become. I believe the right option and the right answer is to become completely comfortable in the moment on stage and then follow the themes and ideas that come into your mind in that moment, and to use those themes and ideas to create contrast, conflict and narrative. So when combined with things like sensational answers, which gives us a nice moment within a Q&A, non-confirmation of information, as we just discussed, that also gives us a great moment in Q&A. And then just two pieces of known information, which in the performance last night I knew that somebody's dog was called Poppy and I knew that somebody's daughter was called Phoebe. And based on this, I was able to get huge reactions from these moments. So I found out those things by looking at the guest list and then doing some quick research. I found one person on Facebook and one person on Twitter. And then I have those two pieces of information. Now you must absolutely resist the temptation to go digging for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, because it won't help you. That people don't want mind reading tricks from Q&A. They want connections and they want readings. And they want readings in the truest sense of a deeper level than just saying, you went to Middleton High School. The minute it sounds like that, then the gig's up, the gaff's blown, they know. Like, it's not what it's about. So two pieces of information, and you'll notice that I actually I had a beautiful moment of synchronicity, and I do believe that the more you do this, the more synchronicities will occur for you, and the more aware you are in the moment, the more you'll start to see how you can tie together invisible lines. And it's in the creation of invisible lines that great moments of spontaneous miracles will occur. So last night I had a woman stand up and I spoke about creativity and da-da-da-da, and then I moved on to the imagined oracle, where I said, when I look at you I see the High Priestess. And interestingly, with the High Priestess, there's actually a moon on the card. And then she said, oh my God, yeah, I've got this on my arm. And she rolled up her sleeve and she had a moon tattooed on her arm. Now, I didn't know that. Now, I know watching it, perhaps you were thinking as a magician that I'd noticed that somehow as she walked in. I genuinely didn't know that. That was a moment of synchronicity for me, and it was as amazing to me as it is anybody else. It's slightly annoying that it was on her arm. I wish it was kind of hidden in the middle of her back, so everybody would have known that I wouldn't have known, but I didn't know. And in that moment, it was only possible because I was able to take a moment to describe an element of this tarot card. Had I not done that, that would never obviously have happened. So I do think the more you do this, the more you start to see synchronicities. And I'm sticking with this particular reading because I knew the name of her dog, or her boyfriend's dog. So when I then saw this, when I then described the tarot card and I spoke about a moon, I kept saying to her, why does Luna connect to you? Now, Luna is just another word for a moon. Now, if she had said, it doesn't connect to me in any way whatsoever, I would say it's really interesting. It keeps coming back into my mind. Very often, it's a big challenge for me is to solve the puzzles. I'm not entirely sure why Luna would be important right now, but I hope we can make sense of it a little bit later. Let's move on. And I'd skip straight past it. But in the instance last night, by including that, by just talking about the moon, and I got that moment of strong hit, and then I said, it's Luna, something about Luna. Why would that make sense to you? She then said, well, that's my dog's middle name. First things first, who gives their dog a middle name? I've never had that happen before. But in that moment, she's now created the perfect moment for me to release the information that I had about her. That's pure synchronicity last night. That wasn't structured. It wasn't some super clever way of getting there. It was just a moment of synchronicity. But what that does show to me is you should never be opening with the known information, because you want the conversation and the dialogue to start flowing backwards and forwards between you and the person to allow for moments like that. So rather than just going out and immediately using that known piece of information by going to her and saying, oh, I get the impression that you're an animal person, maybe dogs, maybe dog's name is Poppy, because I desperately want to impress, so, got that pressure of like, oh, you've got to get this out. Instead of doing that, by holding it back, we leave room for moments like that to happen, which will create much stronger moments of miraculous mind reading. So in that moment, when I talked about the moon, and then she said, my dog's middle name is Luna, I've never met anybody that has a dog that has a middle name anyway, but my dog's middle name is Luna. Obviously, in my mind, in that moment, I'm jumping in the air. I'm 60 foot in the air, screaming like, I've got you. Because in that moment, I can immediately say, oh, that's Poppy's middle name. And this is an incredibly disarming way of revealing information, as if you just always knew this. I don't do a big setup in that moment. I don't suddenly go, oh, well, just think of that dog's first name. It's not a mind reading trick. I want to create the illusion that I know so much more than I do, always know more. So a strong way to do that is act as though I'm only interested in sharing the information that I feel is worthwhile. So withholding information is sometimes as useful as revealing it. And allowing synchronicities in their truest sense to present themselves will sometimes lead you to really great miracles. A lot of this is about being completely comfortable and knowing and sensing where you should be moving next, like which direction shall I go in here, how shall I get there. So with two known pieces of information, one of them last night was blown because of the moment of synchronicity that was too good for me to pass up. In that moment, I'm thinking like, okay, cash out, right? It's not worth me holding this investment any longer. I'll sell now, right? Because I think that's a great reveal in that moment, because it appears spontaneous, and it also appears as though it's come from them, not from me. It's almost a challenge without being a challenge. So in that moment, I'm ready to let that one go. So that's that one gone. Now I've still got one more piece of information in my mind, and that was the name of a child. It was Phoebe. So I'm going to those people, and I see a mum and a young daughter. And I know that Phoebe is a sister to this of this family and a daughter of this family. So I just started reading based on what do I think a sister of that age is going to think about her sister. The girl that I was reading to looked to me like she was, maybe 18 or 19 years old. The other sister, she told me, because I continued the guess. I said, "You have a sister? Yes. You have a brother? Yes." That was a guess. And then I continued again by saying, and you have a sister that's younger than you. Yes. But in that moment, the reaction that she gave me wasn't like a strong yes. I think I actually said she's much younger than you, is what I think I said, and then she sort of went, she's younger than me, or something like that. So in that moment I got the impression that their age gaps wouldn't be that far apart. So I started creating a narrative in my head about two sisters fighting over their clothes. It was that simple, like, you know, what would two sisters get angry about with each other, how would that annoy each other, and then I turn it into something that sounds a lot more significant than it is. I just think about somebody going through sort of puberty and teen troubles and all of those things, and the sister being frustrated by their grumpy sibling, and then I created the narrative there. And then obviously I brought the mum back in by saying she's been there and done it, remember how rebellious you were. Now everybody likes to think of themselves as being rebellious in their younger years, especially at that age, right? They like to think that they did something rebellious when they were younger. Certainly in their early 20s they like to think of themselves as being, you know, independent, free thinking, you know, brilliant, young, uninhibited spirit. And certainly this particular girl sort of looked more sort of punk rock than perhaps establishment. So she's going to enjoy that idea. But of course, remember, for the rest of the room there, this rebellious action, and the way I'm handling the information, I say, remember when you were quite rebellious, we won't go any further with that. This could be that, you know, she went and burnt down houses and has just got out of prison. It could be that she, you know, refused to turn her bedroom light off. It could be from like the lowest thing right the way up to the highest thing. And yet in the moment, as an audience, we create the narrative that suits us the best. So it connects with the person and it sounds exciting to the rest of the room. And then I get to say to the mum, you've been there and you've done that. You looked after her. She wasn't easy. You need to listen to your mum more. And the mum is certainly not going to say, no, he's wrong. Don't listen to me any more than they should. So there's a lot of this that is just basic common sense, and there's a lot of it that is intuitive. There's a lot of leaving open-ended options for synchronicity, and there's a lot of really genuinely using an established oracle, something like a deck of tarot cards, to base your themes from. I think one of the best things you can do if you really want to start doing the kind of people reading or Q&A, as you saw a mini performance of, is to really master a traditional system, something like tarot cards, palm reading. I like tarot cards the most because I think they're most kind of visually inspiring. So if you imagine the image of a tarot card, there's a lot you can pick away from it. The Wheel of Fortune, for example, comes to mind as I'm talking to you, which for me would be about decisions or personal vision, movement, and a kind of turning point. But not only that, I see the image of movement in that, so I can say to the spectator, I get the impression that you're at a point of kind of great progress. There's something on the precipice. It's almost here, but you need to move towards it. You're waiting for it to move towards you, and it won't happen that way. It would take years for a man to stand on the street with his mouth open and suddenly find food flying into it. It's much quicker if you go to what it is that you need and the things that will fulfill you. I see a decision happening here, but it's all about motion. It's all about movement. I feel like you're hemming yourself in and you need to move. I can't tell you why I'm feeling this. This is the overwhelming feeling I get. Move, 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 move. This is a very good reading in Q&A. It's a very strange reading, but it's a very good reading and it sounds very real. And then when you pepper in all of the other things, especially if you're using it in the touching on Hoy approach, with the touching on divination middle, now we have this nice solid block of readings. And by doing it in this way, remember, you've already got the credit for specifically answering 3 readings from the touching on Hoy sequence. So in total, I gave around 8 or 9 readings, apparently, last night with the touching on Hoy sequence and then the mass sequence with the audience. And then I always close with some, I didn't want to put my true closing lines on this DVD, I apologise for that. I wanted to keep those kind of a secret for a while in my show, but I always close on a way that they can find an answer to their question. Last night I said, flip a coin and when the coin is in the air the answer will become clear, which is kind of an old concept here, that when you flip a coin you already know the answer you want. John Archer tells a great story about a friend of his who couldn't decide which flavoured yoghurt to buy or to eat, and he said, oh well, I'll flip a coin, and he had a strawberry yoghurt and he had an apricot yoghurt, and he flipped a coin and he looked at it and went, oh, I didn't want that one. So in that moment, he absolutely knew the answer to his own question. So I think it's kind of good at the end to not give a disclaimer. I don't believe in disclaimers, I think they're largely pointless, but to give a kind of this message of, you know, you don't need an individual to find the answers to your questions. You're more than capable of answering your own questions. And I think that's just life affirming and worthy. So I hope that in this, what feels like very ethereal technique, you can take from this the inspiration, There's no way you can take from this all of the information, because the only way you'll get to the information is not by learning it from me or from anyone else, but instead by creating it yourself. So the right thing that I hope that you can take from this is the inspiration and a framework, understanding that I'm not just standing there and saying stuff, but equally I'm not memorizing lines, but instead I'm using a system that allows me to talk about different things in different ways. So if this can become an inspiration for you to then go and craft your own system, that's absolutely the highest outcome that I could hope for, and it's the right way for you to do it. It's the way that will lead you to really rewarding performances. But I know what you're like. You want a couple of easy things to get you there, so why not? As well as all of this stuff, as well as all of the imagined oracle, alphabet system, themes, general themes, and all of this stuff, there are some other things that I do. I have a whole bunch of things in my head, or not a whole bunch, just a handful of what I call statistical statements. These are things that are likely to have happened to lots of people, but sound very specific to individuals. Things like, I will say to a woman very often, if she's wearing, this is kind of hard to explain, but if she looks dressed up to me, and I don't mean just wearing like fancy clothes or expensive clothes, I mean if it looks for some reason like she's happy with her outfit, like she's put some effort into it. I can't explain how you know that, you just know that. I will always say, oh, I like your earrings, I prefer those to the ones that you weren't sure about before you left the house. Most women change their earrings once or twice before they eventually put them on. This one is a very good one. I will also say to many scientific people, so if I can get the sense that they're quite analytical in the way that they approach the world, I will say you have an inner conflict. One side of you wishes to understand everything, the other side of you wishes you never knew how any of it worked. You miss the feeling of magic, and that's why you watched that children's movie just a couple of days ago. It gave you that feeling. It's okay, I won't tell anybody else. This seems to hit very frequently. Another one that I use, especially with the sort of smoky, seductress girl, like if I see a girl that's very sexualized and appears to be using sexuality as part of her identity, I will always say, I get the impression that you have trouble trusting people, and I understand that you've been taken advantage of in the past, but I don't think you should continue this in your future. There was a situation just a couple of weeks ago where you were caught looking through somebody else's phone. I think if you're looking for a problem, you'll always find it. In that instance, looking for your problem created it. I'd leave that alone for the time being. Again, this one seems to hit quite a lot. So just what I think of as being statistically likely statements. This one is very powerful. I mean, this is kind of what George Anderson was really talking about, but in this instance they're made even more specific by being actual events that I seem to see happening around me quite a lot. So I have 4 or 5 of those ready in my mind at any one time, and I can drop those into a Q&A if I see the right kind of person. But I'm always allowing the person to lead the information. I'm never allowing the information to lead the person. That's the major change from the George Anderson approach. So those kinds of statements are good to have memorized. They're not cold reading statements because they won't always hit. They're not so general that they will hit with every human being that's ever existed, but they are general enough that you stand a very high likelihood that those things will hit. And when they hit, they're far, 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 far stronger than saying, you are the life and soul of the party, but you're also quiet and introverted at times. You have an amazing sense of humour, only when you understand the joke, because that stuff just doesn't sound specific. So for me, statistical statements are really useful. Sit down, press pause, get a piece of paper. Don't press pause yet, get a piece of paper, then press pause. Get a piece of paper and write down a list of things that you have experienced. Maybe, I don't know, go for 20 things, and then call 5 of your friends and ask them if it's happened to them. And if it's happened to 5 of your friends, I think it's a pretty solid likelihood that it's also happened to lots more people. So then you want to be looking for the things that feel very specific and use those to form your list of commonly occurring experiences. So I hope that in amongst all of this, you will find the inspiration to form a system that you can then use to start giving readings. And I now perform a full hour and 10-minute show that is only Q&A, that is only readings, and it's taken me my whole career really to get to the point where I'm able to do that, and I'm still learning every day, and I still hope to be learning for the next 50 years about this particular thing, Q&A. This is a great way for you to learn Q&A because you've got the protection of the touching on Hoi, touching on divination sequence, which leads into the gallery readings. If you then have one more routine that you use as a closer, if the Q&A isn't going so well, you can shorten it up and then put the closing routine in place. And you've got a kind of safe approach because you don't have to walk out in front of an audience feeling like you're empty-handed. You've got this structure and you can start working on it and allowing that Q&A sequence to become longer and more powerful. And at some point, you, like me, I'm sure, will put away the tricky envelopes and walk out and just do readings. So we're joined by Katie. Katie, I have a question for you. Have you ever had a psychic reading before?
No.
No? Well, this should be quite interesting and I hope quite fun for you. And it's all based on one piece of great advice that I received. I received this piece of advice. Whenever you visit a museum or an art gallery, always go twice. The first time, walk around by yourself. The second time, walk around with a guided tour. It's amazing the things that you didn't see on the first trip that you suddenly realise on the second. But more importantly, it's amazing the things that you create on the first trip that the guided tour would never have taught you yourself. So, I want you to build a special place in your mind. It's going to be your own museum. First time, you'll explore it all by yourself. Second time, I'll join you in the experience. I want you to close your eyes for me and I want you to think back to when you were maybe a teenager, beginning to experience the world as an adult for the first time. Begin by creating a little room in your mind where you can display all of the things that make you feel confident and happy. All of those things that you're proud of when you look back to that time in your life. And now imagine you're leaving that room and you find yourself at a doorway. You walk through the doorway and inside of this room you place all of the unresolved questions, those things that you find yourself returning to from your own past that perhaps have been left unresolved. Why did I do that? Why did he do that? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't he do that? Those kinds of questions. And now you find yourself turning around and walking out of that room and you enter a brand new room. This room is dedicated to your future, a place where there are no regrets because it hasn't yet happened, so it can become whatever you would like it to be. In your mind, imagine the amazing things that you would like to see taking place in your own future. When you're comfortable and happy, just open up your eyes for me. Good. So I hope by doing that you've built some kind of interesting structures within your own mind about your past, your present, and in fact your future. Now it's my turn to take a look at those things. Please hold my hands. And I want you to begin in your mind to imagine you're bringing me back to that place in the past, the place when you were maybe a teenager and those unresolved issues. And now skip straight forward to the future, the things that you want to happen, the place with no regret. And now we'll spend a moment in the present. There's no need to construct that because it's constructing all by itself. Okay, good. I have a couple of ideas with you. Now we don't have time to talk about all of these, so I'm just going to write down the things that come to me the strongest. There's actually lots of different things that came through. This one's more about the past than anything else, actually. These are the things that come to me. So take a look at those, and from those, which one would you like us to talk about? The top one. Okay, great. So in a normal situation we could spend a lot longer talking about each one of those things, but right now we'll focus on the idea that came through the strongest. Each one of those things did connect with you, correct? But the top one is the one that's the most important to you right now. So let me tell you what I saw. I saw this in the future room, not in the present or the past. Would that make sense? Good. So I saw this in the future room, and what I saw was a distinct difference to the present. I think in the present you're finding yourself more involved in supporting other people's visions. Does that make sense? So you're literally playing the supportive role to the other person's ideas and concepts. There's an amazing quote which is, you better start building your own dream or somebody will hire you to build theirs. And right now you're beginning to really think about that particular quote. You're starting to think to yourself, I can only go so far with this particular line where I'm always playing the supportive role, and you want to branch out and begin new things for yourself. And in this future room, I see this working quite well for you, but I see it's going to be the present that really matters. You see, the past, you can't change that. All you can change is the way that you feel about it. The present, well, that's constantly unfolding exactly in the moment that we're in right now, but it's in the present that the changes take place. By making the actions here, you begin to create the future that you want, and I believe the future that you want is financial independence. That's the first thing. I also believe it's specifically relating to creative work and specifically relating to movement. That's another idea that I get here. Maybe dance, maybe something on a stage for yourself. That's the kind of feelings that I get. But I can see, really interestingly, bright colours in the future, and the colours that I see are purple and green. Now, I don't know why I would necessarily see those, but there's a nice smile there, so does that make sense to you? Sort of, good. I see a bright purple and a bright green colour, and it's light is what it is. Purple and green light. And then that goes away, and I can see that you need to... There are two skills that you need to improve on right now, and you already know about these in the present. You're already looking into them. The first is writing, and the second is speaking. You looked into a public speaking course recently? Yeah. You looked into a public speaking course very recently, and you thought to yourself, I need to become stronger at expressing and communicating my ideas. Here's the big secret. Forget about the writing for a moment. Think only about speaking. Because when you write stuff, it's not how you say it. So you're locked into a problem. Every time you write something out, you then try and deliver that to people, and you try and communicate it, but your brain is holding you up because you're trying to remember what you wrote down. Do this instead. Instead of writing it down, take a tape recorder, record what you want to say, keep doing it over and over again, and now you've written a script without needing to write a script. You'll be ready to deliver it in the way that you need to. These things in the present will create the future that you put in that room. Thank you for your help. Thank you for watching. So this is the Mind Museum. I gave you a kind of really abbreviated version of the script that I often use for this, because it's not so much the words that I say, it's more the concept that I want to give you. And to be honest, there's not going to be a huge amount for us to talk about here, because all of the technique that I've already described from the Q&A is really at work here. It's a very simple idea, but one that I've used a lot. And I think it's really incredibly useful and incredibly powerful to have as a kind of stored away in the back of your head piece of completely propless mind reading. It does use a little piece of paper and a pen, but this could be a napkin and a pencil. It could be anything that you find around you. There's nothing gimmicked about any of it. It came from a great idea that relates to, again, a George Anderson concept, where George Anderson would take somebody's palm and he would look at the lines and he would say, oh, this is interesting. We have a really interesting love line. We have an interesting heart line, an interesting soul line. Which one of those do you want me to talk about? And it was that simple. And many people missed this in one of the George Anderson books, and I thought it was really smart to just ask somebody what it is that they wanted to talk about, but it didn't have enough of a psychic flavour for me. And then I realised as well that if we're using traditional forms of divination, we are literally restricting the topics that somebody might wish to talk about. So by taking that away and by making it an intuitive experience, an intuitive moment, we now get to define the themes that people are going to talk about. So you will go through the theatrics of having them think about their life, the past, the present and the future, and you can do this in whatever way you want, really. Your goal here is not to tie yourself down into one theme or one time frame. So you don't want to be just talking about the past, you don't want to be just talking about the present or the future, because you're going to use all of those, as we discussed in Q&A, to shift and move based on the feeling during the actual reading itself. This is a method to acquire the information as opposed to anything else. So I begin by having the person hold my hands, I go through the psychic stuff, I then write down 3 different things on a pad. Now you could write down a lot more than this if you wanted to. The things that I write down in my pad are, the first thing that I write down is this: change and work, with a kind of forward slash there. My handwriting's terrible, so I apologise for that. Love problems, and then draw a triangle and a quick exclamation point. And then underneath that, that says, believe it or not, that says transitions, journey, and then past in brackets. Now remember, this is being scrawled very quickly, but this is kind of relating back to the concepts that I spoke about earlier, that there are specific themes that people are interested in: travel, health, education, sex and love, career, ambition and money. But here I'm picking the ones that I think are going to link the strongest to the person that I'm working with based on the demographics they present to me. So change and work was the one that was picked by our spectator Katie. The important point here is that if you're watching this process, it appears as though I've connected to everything. Because I say, let me write down the key ideas, boom, 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 and I write down these things. And I say, now, in an ordinary situation, we could discuss all of these things and more. However, we don't have time right now. So I would like you to tell me which one you would like us to examine fully. Now, they point to one of them, and I say, but each one does connect in some way. And now I put the book away here. So it appears as though we've just crawled around in their brain, we've picked up on a whole bunch of stuff, and now we're going to go based on their decision. Of course, this isn't true. I always write down change work, love problems with a little triangle, transitions, journeys, brackets, the past. And then I ask them to tell me which one they would like me to talk about. 99% of the time they do want to talk about work, because most people are interested in changing what it is that they do for a living. But if they pick love problems and there's a triangle there, you have a huge reading going on because obviously something exciting is happening in their love life. Transitions and a journey would be an upcoming journey, and so on. But so the core concept here is this would fall under these umbrella techniques that we were talking about earlier. Rather than asking them or telling them, in this situation you get to ask them and tell them, which is really interesting. So it's both techniques meeting in the middle. First, you tell them to work from the list, but then you get to ask them which one would they like to work from. So you get the credit for the mind reading in the construction of the list and the confirmation that each one of these things makes sense to them. And then you get an absolutely specified and focused theme and area to talk about by having them select the area you want them to talk about. So this could be changed to other things. You could write other things on the pad. You could make little drawings, you could do all sorts of things on here and have them pick the thing that relates to them the most. And basically this is becoming an open oracle. So in a sense, where you would have somebody shuffle a pack of tarot cards and then remove a tarot card, and then you would base your reading on that particular card, that would be a closed oracle. Because we're not creating that oracle in real time, we can't take any credit for the creation of the oracle. So here, we get to look as though we are learning much more about the person in the creation of the oracle, which they will then pick the thing from. So it becomes a kind of mix of telepathy, mind reading and future prediction based on which way you want to take it. It's a very abbreviated performance because really the core concept here that I wanted to introduce you to was the idea of asking and telling at the same time with the creation of the list. You get credit for mind reading that you never have to confirm, you never have to do, but most importantly, if you're caught in a situation where you have no additional props and no additional methods available to you, you can grab anything here and use it to achieve this. And even more importantly, this is a great way for you to start learning how to do readings, because you don't have to just start pulling ideas out of the sky. You can use this to guide the themes that you're going to talk about, knowing that even on a basic level, the person you're working with will have to agree with the themes because they are the one that has asked you to speak about those themes. So I think this is a great kind of training wheels exercise for